How are you doing? And later on, switch on TV. They give me the news, they give half truths to me. They give us wise, they feed us lies. How are we doing? Educated, they fabricate, and we sit back till it's too late.
The Radio Adventure. Rick Adams is on.
The microphone, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Rick Adams, with you tonight. We have a guest who's going to give us his thoughts and our thoughts on the latest fiscal crisis, as they call it, facing the United States, which, of course, is something that really resembles a sideshow, if anything else. But we'll talk about that in a minute. To set the tone, I think it is most important to go to the Scriptures, Proverbs 22. And we go to verse 7. Now, in the King James, it says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Wow. In the New International Version, it's translated, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." Boy, does that add up? Pardon the pun, but it does seem to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? Does seem to be apropos to what we are facing here in America today. And this basically is the synagogue of Satan, as we call it. This is them. They who control the finances and the economies of most of the nations of the world. And with me today to discuss the financial goings-on and what is really happening behind the scenes is our resident scholar, Art in Philadelphia. Hello, Art.
Rick, thank you for taking my call tonight.
Thanks for coming on. You have provided our listeners with quite a bit of research that you have done on the what is called the Cosa Nostra mob on your website, noplaceforcorruption.com. But in addition, you also are in quite a position to give us some financial heads up and understanding of how the so-called markets work. So with that in mind, I had to have you on because we've gone through this hoax now, which of course is, as you know, cast as a Democrat versus Republican duel. It's cast as a partisan war between the White House and Congress. And I think you and I both know that it's much, much deeper than that. Rothschild himself said, "I don't care who makes the laws or passes the bills. We control the money. And when we control the money, we control the country." Doesn't that pretty much give us an idea of what's happening right now?
Yes, I would agree. The Rothschild banking interests, the financial interests, have basically put a death grip on the economic activity of this country, which goes all the way back to the beginning of the Reagan administration and the 82 Tax Reform Act, where they said they will use junk bond financing for mergers and acquisitions of companies. And what that basically meant was when they merge a company, they will use the pension funds of the company that's merged, sell off the assets to the junk bond financiers, and then lay off the people so they don't get their pensions.
Mm-hmm. That was the beginning.
That was the beginning.
And then we saw what happened with the whole business of opening up fractional reserve into derivative markets, and from there it became any man's game, a guessing game as to where it would end up. Well, we know about the Glass-Steagall Act and the investment banking system, and commercial banks, and so on and so forth. So now it is strictly a paradise of the banksters and a nightmare for everyone else, as we know. So this talk about sequester and cuts is obviously not a serious one, given the fact that no cuts are taking place in the budget. In fact, the budget is growing astronomically as we speak, and only one man who ran for president that I know of actually had a plan to deal with it. You know who that is, right?
Yes, Ron Paul.
He laid out a plan, and he talked about massive cuts in spending over a period of time that would, in effect, remove this problem and deal with the Federal Reserve itself, didn't he?
Yes, he did. But he's not in power.
And he was laughed at, and he was scorned, and he was called a crazy guy and a terrible man and one of those reactionaries from the Stone Age. But you know what? He was right. He was right.
We're spending ourselves into oblivion. Basically, from what they've said recently, is the government spends, if they had to live on a budget where they basically were managing their expenses on the revenue coming in, they would have to cut the government by 1/3. So, and that doesn't even talk about paying off the debt, the trillions of dollars of debt. That's just talking about the operating costs.
Right. Now,
So,
you know, I could cut that budget very, very easily, very quickly, and you could too. And really, we could start with the Pentagon, to be honest with you, because the Pentagon, I would say about 90 or 80% of that budget has nothing to do with defending America. It has to do with defending the world system and world jewelry and their interests. And we could eliminate bases overseas. We could withdraw from our empire status and pull back, eliminate all these warmongering exercises in the Persian Gulf, eliminate just about all of this, and still America would be stronger in that sense, not weaker or more vulnerable. But that doesn't fit into the plans of the international criminal elite, does it?
No, it doesn't. For all the money we spent in the Middle East, you know, for the benefit of the Rothschild banking interest, we could have had energy independence in this country forever, with quite a few ways. One would be, like you mentioned in the past, Gold Island, all the oil up there, all the natural gas refining in the Marcellus Shale, the frozen methane. There's 1,000 years reserve of frozen methane, like 100 miles off the coast of Florida. There's the possibility of spending that money on research to build a fusion reactor, which the material goes, the radioactivity goes completely clean in about 200 years, versus this plutonium stuff that will kill the ocean if it even gets in there in the next several 100,000 years. So we have a lot of options, even still, and also solar power is another example. But the amount of money we spent in the Middle East wars, if we use that to make our country productive, to basically be energy independent, and to build products and services in this country, we would not be living in the poverty that we're starting to see, you know, come throughout the country.
Right.
Detroit's, what we're seeing in Detroit is coming to your community sooner or later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the game plan, and they're just milking us dry as far as we can. And to think that Obama's going to help us, look at his jobs are. It's basically the Rothschilds. It's General Electric, Jeff Immelt.
The people that create the problem always come up with a solution, don't they? Huh?
Right. Well, his solution, the CEO of GE, Jeff Immelt, says with healthcare, he says America's not paying enough for healthcare. We got to pay more. Okay, so he can make more money and export more jobs and outsource more American jobs and allow uncontrolled immigration. That's the next game plan. They want to have uncontrolled immigration of professional labor. So when they do that, you must have shut down the colleges.
Boy, they've got it all pretty much cornered, folks, and you are the little rats in the corner. We'll come back, folks, with more of Art and my discussion here tonight on the program, and play a little clip, too, of interest to you. Rick Adams, Uncensored. don't like the truth, huh?
Everything was all right until you came along.
Yeah, I know all about it, folks, but we're not just going to pack up here and give up the show and give up the fight. We're a noise, we're making a lot of noise, and I think it's time to make some more noise. One of the clips I like here, Art, on YouTube is the men who stole $16 trillion from America. And I'm going to play a little bit of it. This is, Larry Summers, of course, was first scheduled to be the new head of the Fed. But anyway, you get the drift here. Listen in.
Former Obama czar, Larry Summers, is reported to be at the top of Obama's list to replace chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke. With Larry Summers at the helm of the Fed, former Secretary of the Treasury Timothy Geithner and Larry Summers can return to the illegal activities they took part in during the late 1990s. In 1997, Timothy Geithner was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury working for his boss, Larry Summers, then Deputy Secretary, soon to take the helm of the Treasury under Bill Clinton. Geithner and Summers were the core of a good old boys club, with off-the-record meetings on yachts with the world's bankers, planning how they would gut the world of its money. 1997 was the year that it was decided the world's banks would be deregulated, opening up the derivatives market that would soar from a few $1 billion in 1997 to hundreds of trillions just a few years later. What is the long-term worth of the derivatives market today? Hold on to your wallet, $1,000 trillion. How was this accomplished? The same way the Federal Reserve was created 100 years ago. A group of bankers conspired together to create a banking cartel to siphon off the world's money. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, which has sucked out hundreds of trillions of dollars out of the U.S. economy by devaluing the U.S. dollar by as much as 98%. Ever wonder why a gallon of gas in 1929 cost a quarter and now costs $4? It's not those so-called evil oil companies, as our community organizer-in-chief Barack Obama likes to say, but the Fed's devaluing of the dollar. But back to our partners in crime, Timothy Geithner and Larry Summers. Creating the Federal Reserve was for amateurs, according to these good old boys. Hundreds of trillions of dollars were there for the taking, and they quickly got to work. Investigative journalist Greg Palast has uncovered a secret memo sent from Timothy Geithner to Larry Summers in 1997, which spelled out how the banksters would gut the world's economy. The secret memo, now referred to as the Endgame memo because it begins with Geithner's words, "As we enter the endgame," included the direct, private phone numbers of the world's bankers, including billion-dollar embezzler John Corzine, then head of Goldman Sachs, along with the heads of the other megabanks. Like a bankster personal assistant, in the memo Geithner spelled out how Summers was to personally call each CEO to make plans for what was to come, all done illegally and off the record. And what was to come? Figuring out how to create a derivatives market with unlimited returns. By the year 2000, Geithner and Summers' backroom deals had grown the derivatives market from a few $100 billion to a measly $100 trillion, just for one of the megabanks. But gutting of the world's economy couldn't go on forever. Collapse would come, and did come, in the form of the worldwide 2008 economic collapse. Just as the economic collapse came in 1929 as the result of the Fed gutting the economies of the world. But this time the banksters got smart, getting the American taxpayers to cover their losses. According to a class action lawsuit, Star International versus United States of America, now winding its way through federal court with Ben Bernanke's subpoena to testify. During the so-called bank bailouts after the economic crisis, Ben Bernanke's Federal Reserve funneled hundreds of billions of dollars to the megabanks, including foreign banks, all in the name of saving the world's economy, and all paid for by the American taxpayer. But the lawsuit only scratches the surface. According to one estimate, the Federal Reserve's so-called bailout of the world's megabanks amounted to $16 trillion. And when Larry Summers assumes the throne at the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and no doubt he will if Obama hasn't been impeached by then, expect more of the same, America.
Well, it sounds to me, Art, like we're talking about those Syrians and those nasty Iranians, if we can believe Bibi the killer.
It certainly sounds like the Syrians are involved with defrauding the economy of the United States and bringing us down to our knees.
If it wasn't so tragic, it would be humorous. But you see, what is the end game? You heard the term, the end game, from Geithner and Company. What do you think they meant by that?
One of the end games is they're attacking the U.S. dollar, the currency. They want to replace it with the Amero. So they want to basically get the U.S. dollar as cheap as possible, and they don't care what they do, the consequences to anybody, just as long as they get the dollar destroyed as a basically reserve currency, and they replace it with something that they want, that they have control over. And that will further enhance their power and control over our political economic system, much more than they've ever had in the past.
Now, what about the other currencies of Europe and those nations? You think they will experience a similar fate, or are we going to possibly go right into a one world unified monetary system of exchange?
I think they're constantly pushing for the one world monetary system, but I think realistically it'll go in a regional base. First of all, you get the euro over there, and they're holding that together, even though we can see the consequences of that, what's going on with Greece. So I think what will happen is it will start regionally, like you'll have a European currency, national currency, which they already do with the euro. Then you have a South American national currency, a North American national currency, and then they'll just merge them all together. And over time, that basically gives them, pretty much control of the entire world. What was it? Was it Jefferson that says there's two ways for an enemy to attack a country? One is by an army, the other is by a bank, and the bank is more dangerous than the army.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And you mentioned, the bankers are the death grippers. That's what banking is. It means a death grip. A mortgage is a death grip. And that's why I started out quoting Proverbs, because it tells us in the scriptures that the debtor is the slave. The person who owes the money is a slave in many ways. And that's where we are today. See, America, because it disobeyed, is a slave nation. But we don't think of ourselves as slaves. We still beat our breasts and and thump our chests and say, "Oh, we're free. We're the empire. We can beat up on any little country. We can go and do Israel's killing and murder and rampage and so on and so forth. That's what makes us strong." No, that's what makes us weak, and that's why we are collapsing from within through implosion, not explosion. You see?
I agree. What happened in my area, in the Philadelphia area, the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce recently says they want to have unlimited professional immigration, which will be great for the companies that the banks are financing, because they will be able to take control of everything and displace a lot of American labor in that process, and they will get very rich. We're seeing that already with the illegal immigration, and we're also seeing it with professional immigration simultaneously. And the same thing with Obamacare. If you look at one of the major thrusts of Obamacare is to destroy small business in the medical community. That's the way they structured it. There could have been a lot of ways to provide health care without actually attacking American small businesses in the medical community to solve the problems. But that's one of the main thrusts of what they're doing, forcing everybody to close up their practices and become an employee of a corporation like a hospital, health insurance company, or a pharmaceutical company. And then they can start using their mergers and acquisition games like they did before, and create more derivatives until they basically wipe all the financial wealth out of the medical industry.
You're right. And then we're also hearing about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, and a number of other adjuncts to this foreign policy group that wants to just destroy what's left of this country. All right, folks, we'll come back with Art and Philly in just a few minutes here on RBN.
The New World Order thought police are on the run because Rick Adams is back on the Republic Broadcasting Network.
That's right, folks.
You ain't got no idea the trouble you're going to get me into.
Yeah, well, you're in enough trouble, Mr. Obama, and the cast of characters. You see what happens when a man is installed in the White House, just like all of the presidents have been, basically since Woodrow Wilson. And when he does not obey, he's punished. Now, Obama's been doing a pretty good job for the Synagogue of Satan, as we know, Art. And unfortunately, most people do not have a clue as to what is transpiring as we speak with regard to these alleged cuts. Now, the media have been doing a pretty good job of serving their master in the way they are framing this whole question, that it's a matter of cuts taking place, and we know now are being led to believe, as we have for over 2 generations, that the government will take care of us no matter what, that we are slaves and servants of the government, wholly dependent upon them in the long run, which is, of course, exactly the opposite of what the framers said they gave us in giving us a republic. So what is it that we are being told by the media? That government is not out of control, that spending is not out of control. There's just a real tug of war between these two opposite parties in Congress fighting over who can best serve the American public with more debt obligations, more sellouts, and more total destruction of their dollars. So you see, the media once again are servants of the master in totally misframing this whole question, aren't they?
Yes, they are. We're basically spending ourselves into oblivion through our government and destroying this country. And who's talking about that outside of people like you?
No one. No one on talk radio and most of these mainstream so-called organizations is talking sense. They're talking, after the horse is out of the barn, how do we get him back in? Well, you're not going to get him back in, okay? Horse is gone. He's finished. He's out. And he likes his freedom. He doesn't want to be part of that slave mentality. He wants to be free to roam. Now, that's the banker. That's the criminal. That's the elite. And they are acting as they will act because that's their role. But here's the point. You alluded to it a couple of weeks back ago. But what this whole thing is all about, this so-called crisis that we're going through now with these cuts and this budgetary crisis, and now the question comes into the debt ceiling. And my guess is that they have, again, no alternative. Being captives of the banksters, they're going to have to agree. And once they get through finger-pointing and performing their act on stage, they're going to get behind closed doors, go out to dinner, shake hands, and come back and shaft the American public again with a raise in the debt ceiling. And you said that a few weeks ago, and you also said, and that will cost the American public more in interest.
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's what they've been doing all along. I mean, it's the reason why in 1920 a silver dollar and a paper dollar had the same purchasing power, and now it takes over 20 silver dollars to have the equivalent purchasing power. 20 paper dollars to have the purchasing power of a silver dollar. So what they're doing is what I've seen from bidding on federal contracts, working with bids, is that they're going to debase the dollar by 15% a year for the next 5 years. That's the inflation factor. Okay, what does that mean? That means 75% price deflation, or what it means is purchasing power of your dollar in your wallet in 5 years will go down to 25 cents. So, you're looking at gasoline at $3 some cents. You should be looking at it roughly 4 times as high, $12 to $14 a gallon of gas. Okay, they will continue to pay your Social Security. Okay, but and you'll continue to get those benefits. But what will happen is the purchasing power of the dollars that they're going to give you are going to be worth 25 cents on the dollar. Okay, so what does that do? That gets the debt off the backs of the government and puts it on the people. By basically attacking the purchasing power of your currency through printing up all this money. And they're saying it doesn't have any impact. Well, it has a very favorable impact when you print that money up on the government. It has a very detrimental impact to the American public.
Well, clearly it does. And again, the media are not telling anybody that because they'd be doing their job if they were. Now, let's talk a little bit about this so-called Affordable Health Care Act that was given its blessings by the Supreme Court a year or so ago. That, of course, has opened up its first major phase today at the same time, ironically, that we have this shutdown, allegedly, of government. Now, your thoughts on what that will do to impede any economy and help further the destruction of both the so-called healthcare system and the economy itself?
All right. Well, there's one part of it people don't talk about that I see is going to have a major impact. You have a 3.8% real estate sales tax. Okay, with the exception of if you're a single person, the first $250,000, and if you're a married couple, the first $500,000 in the sale of a primary residence. That's the only exception. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you look at it, say there's a house worth $100,000 now, and you basically pay the Obamacare taxes $3,800. Okay, over inflation, like we're talking about, say 5 years from now, in inflation it's up to $200,000. So now it's $7,200. So here's the same piece of property turned over. They got the double amount of revenue in Obamacare real estate sales tax. Okay, so if you actually look at it, when you do go through several cycles of that, the effective rate of Obamacare is about 6% on real estate transaction, the cumulative effect. Okay, when you look at real estate being 2/3 of the entire economic activity of the United States, you're talking about 4, maybe 5% decrease in the gross domestic product of the United States. Okay, that's not and that's just one tax that they have in there. They're talking about the cost for providing the care. Yes, they're going to provide care to additional 20% of the population, but what are they going to get? What kind of care? They're getting how would you say, very marginal health care benefits as far as what they're actually providing there. And in the process of that, they're going to destroy good health care benefits for another 20%. So the net effect will be 40% of the American people will have health care that's very marginal. Okay, so that's not, it's very similar to what they did with busing, as an example, to solve the discrimination problem. Instead of solving the problem and raising the issue, raising people up to the standard, we're going down to the least common denominator. That's what I say.
It's the same providers, though, that are going to be running the system again. Right. This is really a Talmudic medical system, and one of the things that is in there, among many other options that people have not read about, is the access to birth control and abortion, I might add, in this field of choices that people will be given. Of course, they denied that from the beginning, but if you really look at all the implications, some of the legal people I know have, they said it's in the bill, it's in the law, which is now signed into law. And this Republican attempt, by certain members of the Tea Party, though laudable, of course, is obviously an orchestrated event to make it look as if there is some opposition. And they're putting on quite a show, raising money as a result again. But the reality is, it's settled, okay? It's settled because they say it's settled. They have the power. They do what they want. We said that before. And the reality is that people are going to be penalized now. People who can least afford it will be penalized unless they can basically be a CO, conscientious objector, plead a religious, opposition to it, and opt out of the medical care system. But those are not the people who are going to be punished the most, the ones that can't afford it because they could simply get on Medicare and Medicaid. But what they're moving for is the elimination of what's left of the middle class, I believe, through these taxes and punitive measures, aren't they?
Yes, they're turning us into a Brazil where you have 98% of the population as poor and you have 1 to 2% super rich. That's exactly what they're doing. The other thing that Obama said when he had a speech on Sunday, part of I heard, is we're, in effect what he's saying is if you're older, we're going to limit the amount of care. In effect, what he's saying is we're going to the model of what they have in the Netherlands. We'll have euthanasia.
Yeah,
okay?
Exactly.
right? Go to the light, or whatever you want to call it. So that was straight out of his own words, that we're going to basically take away health care from the elder and if we have to euthanize them. Also implicit in that is anybody else who needs nursing care. Say, for instance, you were in a car accident and you're in a nursing home because of the results of that, or if you have childbirth injuries. So he's basically saying that when your cost of care goes too high, we're just going to let you go.
So somebody has to make decisions, I guess, and it will be those who pay for it or those who administer the system. Sounds like government to me. We'll come back, Art. Thank you. We'll take a call or two as well. For Art and Philly, Rick Adams, Uncensored. And they all follow orders in Congress, don't they?
I'm my own man.
Yeah, that'll be the day. You know what, folks? We know why, and we know how come, and we explain it, on my program here. And we try to make people understand what's really going on behind the scenes. The reality is very simple, that there's no way out of this. There's no fiscal way out of this insanity without bloodshed and destruction, because they have blown that balloon up so big now that what they're saying is we need to keep blowing it up a little more, and a little more. So all this chat, all this nonsense about, well, we don't want to see people laid off and lose their job. My friends, all of this economy is a false economy. Art, you know, and I know that everything around us today is, in fact, a myth. That is, that we are prosperous, that we have an economy, that we basically have a private sector. Do you know, the private sector now has shrunk so deeply that if, in fact, this were a real shutdown and people were not going to receive their SS checks and their SDI and everything else, do you realize that over 50% of the American public now is totally or partially dependent upon some form of government assistance?
Yes, I have some friends who work in, how would you say, nursing care law, and they're seeing it. They're saying that in the area we are, about 40% of the people plus are basically getting disability income insurance, Social Security, and they're living off the government benefits. So they're going to get a haircut. They're going to either get a haircut either by price deflation of the dollar, or just like what they did in Greece, that they're just going to basically take 10, 20, maybe even 60% off the top of their benefits just to deal with this. We're seeing this in Detroit going bankrupt with their pensions, and it's cycling through the entire economy.
Now, of course, people like Chucky Schumer will be suffering along with the rest of us, won't they?
When the people finally take them out to the streets and tar and feather them and give them a one-way trip to Gaza, he will be suffering.
I have a feeling that's not going to happen anytime soon, but it would certainly be nice, wouldn't it, though?
Yes.
Yes, it would. All right, let's take some calls here. I got a couple of calls for you we want to bring up, and one of them is Barry. Barry, come on up.
Hey, Rick and Art. Thank you for taking my call. First, I want to call it Obama Don't Care. And secondly, I work for the military on a civilian contract. And what I've been told, that some of the people were sent home today without pay. They're not going to get paid. The ones that stay, that they want to stay, are going to get the vouchers. And some have to work without pay. And if they say, I don't want to work without pay, well, then you're fired. And then we got the federal prisons. Some of them are getting working without pay. And they have to work so that the prisoners come out of the prisons. I see, like, people think that the economy is going to crash like this year or next year. I believe what Art's saying. I think it's going to be a gradual thing, and then boom, it's going to be like done.
Well, look, at 2008, many people figured it was all over at that point. And no, they were just going to extend the milking operation for another 5 or 6 years. So now we're at that point where they're continuing to do it, and they may very well continue another year or so. We don't know. But we know that there is an end game, as they say, and the end of the road will come at some point. So that's what we need to be mindful of, Barry.
I'd like to hear what Howard has to say.
Well, when they had the G8 summit, I believe last year, Obama basically was saying to the other countries that the dollar will come down and it will be gradual. So the game plan is to devalue the dollar according to the rest of the world's agreement by 15% a year, which means we're going to destroy the purchasing power of the dollar to 25 cents in less than 5 years, in roughly 5 years. It could be 8 years, depending how things go.
Well, if that's the case, then people better buy everything that they can now, while they can, that they need for the future. And
We've been telling them that for a long time, Barry, haven't we?
I know. I know, but, I mean, it's just crazy, Rick. I mean...
Well, it's not really crazy. I mean, it's all scripted out there. We know what's going on.
I know that. But, I mean, when you know the truth, you go... What a crazy game these guys are playing, and there's so many people that don't know that this is all planned and all that, and you try to tell them, they're like, you're one of those crazy nuts.
No, only a handful of people really understand this, to be honest, a very small percentage, and that's why it makes them successful at what they do. Otherwise, they'd be out of business, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it's just my daughter, my granddaughters, just, my heart goes out to them, you know?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for your work and your great YouTube videos. Barry has quite a few that he's put together or sent and forwarded to us, too. Thank you for that, Barry.
Good work.
Okay, Fred in Michigan is up next, I think. Hello. Fred, are you there?
Yes, I am, Rick. Great to be with you, brother, and Brother Art as well.
Thank you.
This woman, Karen Hudis, was interviewed a few times, World Bank, a 20. Interestingly, she puts all the blame on the Vatican, and she said the Rothschilds are Knights of Malta, and she also figured in the Masons into the mix, as well as the Jesuits. So then she went on to make a statement regarding this thing called the... what's that alternative currency that's being promoted?
Amero.
No, the bid dollar.
You're talking about the Bitcoin, not Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, right.
So she actually commended its introduction and use. But so I wanted your take on that. But first, I wanted to remind everyone that might be listening that President Lincoln made the statement in 1862 that the government must create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of government and the buying power of consumers. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is in the government's greatest creative opportunity. By the adoption of these principles, taxpayers shall be saved immense sums of interest. Money shall cease to be master, become the servant of humanity. Then he stated, we gave the people of this republic the greatest blessing they've ever had, their own paper money to pay their own debts. So if that's true and John Kennedy began doing the same thing, what would it take for the people like us at the grassroots level to, I don't know, like they do in Switzerland, start holding our own town hall meetings and force the issue and stop paying the salaries of the public servants? What do you think?
Go ahead.
Well, I think the Switzerland model is a good idea to go. But as far as, it's a complicated process of how that changes. I think at this point, it's too far gone that people have to start looking at alternatives, like you're saying, work cooperatively. The model you're describing, where it's successful, look at the Amish. They already have it working. That's the way to bypass the system if you want to look at the business model. As far as the Jesuits, what's the motto of the Mossad? By disinformation we shall wage war. Do you feel like war is being waged against you? Do you feel like you're getting a lot of disinformation? I did the research on this noplaceforcorruption.com. It clearly identifies that it's the Rothschilds that are behind us. There is no Jesuit. It's the Rothschilds. And the Rothschilds, it's basically the Jewish community which is working in hand with big parts of the Chicago Syndicate, and that's what's doing it.
Yeah. Well, Karen Hudis is probably covering. She's a World Bank attorney, and so I think she's probably on the take, too. And, Rick, whenever you have time, I'd like you to give a brief review of the parable of the talents out of Matthew, because to me it seems to be...
All right, we'll try to get into that, okay? But time is running out. I want to see if I could just bring up Frank. Thank you for your call, though. Frank, briefly, 30 seconds, Frank from North Carolina.
Okay, I'll cut it short. December 31st, 2012, I got Alex Jones over at Genesis Communications to admit live on air that the Jewish Mafia, quote, the Jewish Mafia is at the heart of the New World Order agenda.
Bingo.
Unquote. Bingo!
Bingo. Thank you, Frank. That's all we needed to hear. All right, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Art. I appreciate you coming back tonight. We'll talk again soon.
You too.
Thank you. NoPlaceForCorruption.com, folks. Rick Adams, good night.